This is John Musgrave. Thanks for clicking on the podcast. If you like this content or like this episode, please click the like button or even subscribe. Thanks very much. Yeah, so you've got three what? Exiles or deportations. Yeah. And so this deportation, 605, who goes to Babylon then? Daniel and the nobles, right? The most useful, the educated. Right? And they go, and you see this in Daniel. And what's their job when they get to Babylon? Why is Nebuchadnezzar taking them? Yeah, to help him. They become counselors to him. He adds them to the wise men there. And then 598, who goes then? Yeah, that's the main deportation. But some people are left behind for 11 years under Zedekiah, is the last king there. And then what happens in 586?
The temple's destroyed, Jerusalem's
flattened. So the temple, not one stone is left upon another. It's burned down to the ground. And what happens to the Jerusalem walls? Flattened. Therefore, Nehemiah later has to rebuild the walls. That's why he has to rebuild the walls, because they get flattened right there. Okay. And so this group, some are deported, a lot die, and some scatter various places. Like Jeremiah ends up going to Egypt with some folks there. Okay? And so then so we can say like 605, these three dates to 539. What do we call that? It's on your sheets. The exile. Okay, so that's the exile. That's the branch over 3, right? You see that there? So your top box there is exile. Your bottom boxes are Daniel, main deportation, and temple burning, last deportation. And then when you get to 538, the people arrive. What happens?
back home.
Yeah, you have the restoration. 538, people arrive back home in 538. So the decree is 539. Who's the decreer of you can return home? Cyrus, yeah. And he's called by his other name in the book of Daniel.
Darius.
What's that? Billy Ray, yeah. That's his full name, Billy Ray. So we just call him Cyrus for short in the Bible. Yeah, thank you, Bill. Yeah, who's Cyrus's daughter? Miley, there you go. Theater of the absurd here. Okay, so Cyrus is the decreer, and he's known by what name in the book of Daniel? Darius. Okay, so Darius is the lion's den king. Okay, and he loves Daniel, and he gets fooled by his other advisors who are jealous of Daniel. This is Daniel 5. And so Daniel goes into the lion den, but this is Darius, and Darius who ends up telling his kingdom, hey, everybody worship the God of Daniel. He saved him from the lion's den. But it was very common for kings, kind of like popes, to have 2 names. And so there can be a throne name and then the person's real name. So Darius and Cyrus, same guy there. If you're ever looking in history, there are several Dariuses and several Cyruses too. There's a Cyrus the First, and there's a Darius the Great, and there's Darius the Mede, and some different Dariuses. But this Cyrus, Darius that declares the Jews can go back to their homeland is the Darius from Daniel 5 as well. By the way, Isaiah 45:1 calls Cyrus what?
The Lord's anointed.
The Lord's anointed. What Hebrew word is that?
Christ, or Messiah.
The Messiah. So if you think the Messiah is just the Son of God, you're wrong. Unless you think Cyrus the Babylonian was the Son of God. Okay, and same thing, that the priests are anointed. They're Messiahed. Okay, prophets, anointed, Messiahed. Kings, anointed, Messiahed. It's that word. All these people are Messiahs, lowercase m, not divine. Okay, but God calls, and we can look at it as we're looking in Isaiah later. Cyrus, my anointed. And if you're reading Hebrew, it's the Messiah. It's that hard H, the het, which like l'chaim kind of thing there. But people arrived back in 538. They start building the temple again. They build the foundation, 538 to 536. But then they quit. And so what happens in 516? They finish the temple. So the temple's reconstructed in 516. Okay? All the prophets in the Old Testament talking about temple reconstruction are talking before this date. So what does that mean when you're reading the Old Testament and you read that the temple will be built again? What does that mean?
It happened.
It happened. It was fulfilled. So should you look today for the temple to be rebuilt as a fulfillment of God's word? No, you should not, because that was fulfilled in 516. All those prophets are speaking before 516. And so this happens. And so when the people get back, JoJo and those guys.
I was thinking get back to where they once belonged.
Beatles fans out there. When they get back, it gets to 520, and it's just the foundation of the temple still, because they quit in 536.
Because they wanted their panel.
They wanted their paneled houses, like Greg Brady and company. There wanted their paneled houses,
Shag carpet.
and their shag carpet, and their beaded entryways. There.
Don't forget the saloon doors too.
Yes, there we go. If you didn't live through the 70s in the United States, that's we're kidding about all that stuff. But yeah, and so in 520, two prophets, Zechariah and Haggai, start preaching to the people. And Haggai says, "Hey, I noticed your paneled walls in your houses, but what's going on with the temple here?" And so at 520, both Zechariah and Haggai, right? Not Malachi yet, but Zechariah and the two executives, and they preach to the people and say, "Get this temple built." You wonder why you're not having the restoration blessings that God promised in the prophets before the exile? It's because the temple's not built. You need to be worshiping God as He prescribed His own worship, or you will not be blessed. So get the temple built, and then you won't have holes in your pockets, and you won't plant much and harvest little. That's Haggai chapter 1. And so they do it. They respond. And Zerubbabel and maybe Jehoahaz, I forget, I'm forgetting, and Joshua, the priest, they lead the people, and they finish the temple building in 516. Okay, and then 430, what's our last date there? Malachi. Yeah, that's our last prophet, and so that's why we put that date there. Yeah, Laura.
Quick question. So between 538 and 516, were there no sacrifices?
Correct. Yep. That's a problem, isn't it?
A little bit.
Yeah. Yep. How can you get your sins forgiven? God says, "I will forgive their sins" when they offer these animal sacrifices, and they're not doing it. At least they're not doing it appropriately if they are, and it's not recorded because the temple's not up. Yeah. Okay, good question. Flip your page there, and we'll just go through this quickly. Number one, what's there? Yeah, Ahaz is there, and that reminds us of Hosea. So these are the minor prophets in order. And then there's that hole in the middle of the hose. And what's that remind us of? Joel. And then what's next? What do we see in number 3? A moose, but it's not a moose. It's what? Amos. There we go. And then the moose lands on a bed, which is Obadiah. And then what comes and squashes that moose on the bed? A whale, and that reminds us of Jonah. Yep. And when there's a whale on the bed, you better ask him what's going on. So you have an interview that happens with the big whale there, and that's Mike with a mic. So that reminds us of what book? Micah. Yeah, and the whale steps up to the mic, and what's he do first before he starts speaking? Clears his throat. How's he clear his throat? That's right. Nahum is next. And then after the interview, he's kind of tired, so he does what to get some rest?
Flips on his back.
Flips on his back, and that reminds us of Habakkuk. There we go. So that's our 8th minor prophet there. And then after he's on his back, he thinks he's going to get a nice nap, but he doesn't, because what comes in the room? A zephyr, yes. A west wind comes in and blows him. What's zephyr remind us of? Zephaniah. And it blows him into an office building. And what does he see there in the office building? What's going on? Yeah, the guy is being hugged. There's a hug guy there. And that reminds us of what? No laughing, Joyce. Haggai. And these two guys, we see this as an office space. So what two kind of guys are hugging there? Executives. And so what does Zech remind us of? Zechariah. And then they're competitive executives. And so what does one do to the other?
Hits him with a mallet.
Yeah, takes out a mallet and hits them, and that reminds us of Malachi. There you go. That's quick. We'll go through that in the story form a little bit later. Another day. But I wanted to go ahead and get to Isaiah here. And so that gets you through your minor prophets, if you can remember that storyline there. Okay, so talking about the first Assyrian crisis here in Isaiah, go ahead and turn to Isaiah in your Bibles. First major prophet. So if you find the poetic books, how many poetic books do we have? 5. 5 poetic books followed by how many major prophets? 5. Okay, easy. 5 and 5. Okay, 5 poetic books. Poetic books start with Job. And the reason we call them poetic books, they're written in poetic form. So if you have a Bible that retains the paragraphing of the Hebrew Bible, then you'll see it's short lines, like in the Psalms, like reading a poem. Okay, and Job is that way, and Ecclesiastes is that way, Proverbs is that way, Song of Songs is that way. It's a poetic genre there. That doesn't mean it's made up. It just means it's in poetic form. It's truth in poetic form. So if you find Psalms, then turn to your right, because you're in the poets, and you need to get to the major prophets. Okay. So Isaiah has 3 major sections. So that's our outline for Isaiah. Isaiah 1 through 6, what's that there? Yeah, it's overview. Overview of Isaiah's ministry. So Isaiah writes his book at the end of his life, after his public ministry is over. We see the last event that Isaiah records is 681, which is 5 years after Hezekiah's death. So he's in the front of Manasseh's reign as he's writing this book. And so he looks back on all he's preached from the days of Uzziah. And Uzziah quits being king in 740. So long ministry of Isaiah, 740, all the way through to Hezekiah's ministry to like 680. So Isaiah probably starts fairly young in his life. So he gives an overview of his ministry. And then second section, chapters 7 through 39. Chapter 7 begins his ministry. And what are these speeches that he records from his preaching ministry? What era are they about? Yeah, the Assyrian crises. Okay, and so here are the crises. 734. This is a little bit in the background, but there. and then 701. These are Assyrian crises here. Okay, when Assyria is the major world power. So that's 7 through 39. And then chapters 40 through 66 are our third section, and it's about a different era. It's about the coming era. As Isaiah gets to the end of his life, and he looks forward to what will happen for these folks, so they'll know it beforehand and have assurances about what's happening. And what era is that? Chapters 40 through 66. Yeah, the Babylonian crisis. Yep, Babylonian crisis. Okay, so here we are, and we're talking about the first Assyrian crisis here. And Isaiah is talking to the Judahite king Ahaz. And this is the Syro-Ephraimite coalition in 734, where, as you see on the map there, if you can see Jerusalem here. So here's the Dead Sea, this little thing here, and there's the Sea of Galilee right there. And so northern Israel is just on the top edge of Jerusalem. Okay, and then Judah is basically Jerusalem on down. Okay. And so northern Israel here, and then Aram, which is over here, get together in a coalition and come down against Jerusalem. And Isaiah's talking to Ahaz about how to handle this. And what does he tell Ahaz? We talked about this last week. What does he tell Ahaz to ask for? A sign. And what's Ahaz say? No, I won't. And God says to him, I'll give you a sign anyway. Except now it's going to be a sign of your cursing and what could have been. Yeah, Matthew.
So, 2020 hindsight.
And this sign is the Immanuel child. Okay, go ahead.
It seems like the easiest thing you could do in that situation as a king is to merely ask for a sign. So is this a situation of, and maybe it's not said explicitly, but is it a situation of hardening his heart?
Yeah, we don't have that specifically given, but his heart is hard toward the Lord. Ahaz is not a good king. Ahaz, so
this is more or less just Ahaz being Ahaz.
yeah, this is Ahaz being unfaithful. And so we're here. This is the first, so we say chapters 7 through 39, Isaiah's response to the Assyrian crises, ES meaning plural. And the first crisis is this. Okay, the second crisis I just erased. It's kind of in the background because it's going on in northern Israel, so it's referred to. And then the third crisis with Assyria is what? 701. See how important that timeline is? If you don't know these things, you don't get Isaiah 7 through 39. And you're left to guess and think, oh, this could be modern day, whatever. And it's not. It's not what Isaiah was talking about. He was talking about what's going on in 734, 722, and 701. Okay? And so as you're reading those chapters, you pin those, what Isaiah is saying, you pin it, P-I-N, you pin it to what you read in Kings about these invasions. Okay? Or you can read it in 2 Chronicles as well. All right. Isaiah comes and talks to Ahaz here in 734. It says, here's how God wants you to handle the Syro-Ephraimite coalition. He wants you to ask for a sign. And the sign will be, again, what? A child. Yeah, good. And the child will be named Immanuel. Okay, also has other names. That's right. Goes by Manny for short. That's right. Yeah, and this sign, had Isaiah responded positively, this sign would have meant to him what? Blessing. Okay, so take the name. What's the name mean to Isaiah? If Isaiah responds positively, if he asks for a sign and looks to God for deliverance from the Aramites and the Arameans and the Ephraimites, if he looks to God for deliverance, what will that name mean for him? God will be with us and he'll fight for us and he'll defend us. But he doesn't. And so it becomes God would have been with us. God would have fought for us. God would have defended us. But this child is left over to remind him of that. Okay, and so it's kind of like when you make a bad decision in your life and you see what could have been. Okay, so, when I was that was for dramatic effect. When I was a freshman in college playing soccer, I played sweeper, which is it's like a safety in football. You're behind everybody else playing defense. For 2 years in high school, freshman, sophomore year, I played sweeper. I didn't like playing defense, but I could do it. I played forward all my life, basically. And so I could be a good defender because I knew how to get in the way of offensive players, right? So anyway, but when I got to college, so junior and senior year, I played center halfback, loved that, found out that was my natural position. So when I went to college, I wanted to play center halfback, or at least halfback. And, but I got a spot on the field at left fullback and played that for 2 years and then played left halfback for 2 years in college. But my coach, my freshman year in college, was having trouble. We didn't have a sweeper. Okay, and so he's trying different people out. And I was starting over on the left side, playing left fullback. I'd played basketball, so I knew how to defend people. So the coach liked that. I could guard my man, and we played a one-on-one. We played a man defense. It wasn't a zone of any kind. You had a man, and you guarded that man. But he asked me several times, John, can you play sweeper? And I told him no, because I knew if I played it, I can play it, and I'll get stuck there for 4 years. He didn't know I played sweeper in high school, so I just told him no. But here's what happened. Here's my Immanuel child. The guy who wound up there that year playing sweeper did fairly well, and he got promoted up to center halfback the next year. And I knew for the rest of my 3 years, had I just said yes. I remember where I was standing on the sideline. If we were in Springfield, Ohio, I could take you to the spot where the coach said, John, are you sure you can't play sweeper? Game's going on. He just pulled me out for a breather. And I said no. And I think, boy, if I'd just taken that over, because I knew I could play as well or better than the guy who played that position during the year. And I thought I would have been that guy that got pulled up to center halfback. And so that was my Immanuel child. What could have been blessing for me had I done what I should have done. Do what your coach needs. Do what your coach says. He's your authority. God has put him in place. I'm not the coach, he is. He gets to decide where I get played. So I should have said yes. And that was just, I didn't know any better. Today I'll call it sin because it was. Because he's my authority, you obey your authorities, Romans 13, 1 Peter 2. And that would have been blessing. I got to play center halfback 1 game in college, and I scored 3 goals.
Yay.
I scored 5 goals all college. Okay, so that whole experience is me, God teaching me, here's what could have been, John. Just trust me. Do what I say. Ahaz, if I ask for a sign, and it's Isaiah the prophet, just ask for a sign. Like Matthew said, that would be the easiest thing to do, wouldn't it? Just to do what God says. And then there's blessing. In Ahaz, the end of his kingship would have been, he'd always look back at that. 730, he'd be in 727, and he'd say, 5 years ago, we were getting surrounded by the tribes, by all the 10 tribes and the whole nation of Aram. And I just asked for a sign, and God said, way to go, Ahaz, and he delivered us. And Ahaz would have continued doing that and had a kingship and a kingdom full of blessing. But instead, it's a kingdom and a kingship full of curses and hardship for everybody. Okay, so that's the child. Now, do you remember last week the word for, and if you read liberal scholarship in the book of Matthew, which is Matthew's the one that calls out the Immanuel child and names it to Jesus. Okay. If you read liberal scholarship on Matthew, has anyone read that or been around liberals and what they say about Matthew and the Immanuel child? What's that? They point out the fact that in Hebrew, the word for young woman and virgin is the same word. And you can't distinguish. Now, part of that is it's assumed if you're a young woman, you're a virgin. Okay? And so there's no distinguishing word. We can say a young woman and we can say a virgin, and that means two different things. It may be encapsulated in one person, but it may not be. And so the Hebrew word that Isaiah uses means young woman, maybe a virgin, maybe not. And so as Isaiah speaks this, we have to take into account, okay, if there's a real child, which we find out there is in chapter 8 and chapter 9, this could be a virgin birth, or this could be a birth to someone who's a young woman. Okay? And it appears, since there is a real child here, and it's not made out to be a miraculous divine birth kind of thing, that this was just simply Isaiah's wife, whom he calls the prophetess, which is someone married to a prophet, in chapter 8, or I think, chapter 8, I believe, there. And so Isaiah is telling Ahaz, this child that will be born, by the time this child is old enough to know right from wrong, that's what he says there. By the time he's eating curds and honey, these two kings, Aram and Israel, will be no more. And in fact, that happens earlier. And so that becomes but the Immanuel child is still there. Isaiah's child, legitimately born, with his new wife. That child is still there to remind Ahaz of what could have been. Yeah.
Seriously, your question with respect to the liberal scholarship in Matthew, I would say that there's a good portion of people my age that were exposed to that by way of a movie. It's Guy Ritchie's Snatch. At the very beginning, there's a group of Hasidic Jews that are breaking into a jewelry store, and the main character of that particular scene discusses that exact issue and how the Hebrew word for virgin can also mean young lady.
Yeah.
He goes on to say that thus the idea that a virgin gave birth is actually a mistake, and et cetera and so forth.
I see. Yeah.
But it's just funny that you mentioned that. You asked, have we ever read it? Probably not, but we've been exposed to it, and I would say millions upon millions of people have been exposed to that.
Yeah. Manny. Yeah, thank you.
So is it clarified then in Matthew that Jesus' birth was more specifically virgin?
Yes. Yeah. Because what is, and you see it in Matthew, which was written before Luke, or sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. No, never mind. You see it earlier in Matthew in chapter 1, 20, verses 21. Joseph, but after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. And you see Matthew drawing out that Joseph was going to put her away quietly to break off the engagement because she was impregnated not by him. And an angel appears to Joseph and quells his fears and says, no, what's in her is not even by another man. It's by the Holy Spirit. And so this is a good question here to get on this topic. What we see in the Old Testament is real fulfillment. And then what we see in various things, all these things that are talked about as potential futures and potential futures that actually happen in Old Testament times, they get fulfilled in Jesus more fully. So we can see that at the end of Isaiah, Isaiah 65 and 66. What's the topic of that, Faith? New heavens and new earth. But we say, oh, okay, so is Isaiah all of a sudden talking about when Jesus comes the second time? And we say, no, because right in there in verse 20, it says, and someone who only lives to 100 and dies at 100 will be said to have died early. So we know that Isaiah is not talking about Jesus' second coming and the new heavens and new earth. He's talking about the restoration. And that blessing will be on the people so much that disease and decay will be not part of their existence there. And it'll be like Noah walks out of the ark to a new heavens and new earth. The sky is different. The land's different. It's washed clean. It's blessed. There's no violence going on among people as Noah walks out into his new heavens and new earth, right? But with Jesus, you have the final, or we could say exponential fulfillment, the greater and perfect fulfillment of things with Jesus in the inauguration of the kingdom, the continuation of the kingdom, but especially in the consummation of the kingdom. And so with this Immanuel child, we see it fulfilled right in Isaiah's day for Hezekiah. And Isaiah tells for Ahaz. And Isaiah tells Ahaz, when you see this child, know this. And when this child grows up and can tell right from wrong, I want you to remember something. That I told you this day in 734 that these two kings would be dead. And so that happens in Ahaz's life. Because this child is born to Isaiah and to Isaiah's wife. And the child's, whenever you're old enough to learn right from wrong and eat curds and honey and that kind of thing, Ahaz could see this child and say, okay, this child is old enough to know right from wrong, and these kings are dead. Just like Isaiah said 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever it was. Does that make sense to you? And so you see, so as Isaiah is speaking, and you can look there in Isaiah in verses, your chapters 7 through 9 there. Look at chapter 7, verse 1. Bob, can you read that for us, 7:1?
When Ahaz, son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, the king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it.
Okay, so there's the Seraphimite coalition. And that's the context in which Isaiah speaks these things to Ahaz. Look at verse 10 now, Allison.
Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz.
Andrew, not 11.
Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights.
And Betsy, 12.
But Ahaz said, I will not ask, I will not put the Lord to the test.
Okay. And so there's Ahaz's denial there. And we find out that this child, Immanuel, would be this child that would be born, that would be this sign of this. We say it in verse 14. So Charlene, would you read verse 14 for us?
Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be with the child and will give birth to a son, and will call him Immanuel.
Okay, so therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign, even though you're not going to ask for it. See that? And then 15, back to Jim.
He will eat curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right.
And next, Dakota.
But before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste.
Yeah. So you see that there. This is the sign that a child will not be able to be born a child who's still not conceived yet will be conceived, will be born, and then when the child can eat curds and honey and be able to choose wrong from right, these two kings, Rezin and Pekah, Assyria Aram and Syria, their kings, Aram's king and Israel's king, will be, and their lands will be laid waste. And then going downward, verse 17, Pat.
Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria.
Okay, so he will bring the king of Assyria onto. So here's the thing: just call for a sign, trust that the Lord will be with you, and know that these kingdoms will be wiped out by the Lord. But instead, now Assyria is going to come and wipe you out. And so Ahaz brings on to his people, Judah, this difficulty because of his lack of faith. So that's the first Assyrian crisis. Yeah, Allison.
Did you say a few weeks ago that the God with us of Immanuel can also be God with us in judgment versus God with us in blessing?
Yeah, so it's a day of the Lord thing. God with us. And what's our day of the Lord thing? What's a day of the Lord?
Judgment and blessing.
Yeah, God visits. You know that expression, God visits. And God visits in those two ways, judgment and blessing. Who's he judge? Generically, who's he judge? His enemies and the enemies of his people. And then who's he bless? His people. And the thing is, like we saw in Amos, sometimes his people are wicked. And so his people during Amos's day were saying, oh, we want the day of the Lord to come. We have the day of the Lord. And what does Amos tell them?
No, you don't.
No, you don't. Because God will treat you as his enemies. And he'll come against you in cursing, not in blessing. Okay? And so, so we see this with the Immanuel child. Ahaz has this decision. Do you want the day of the Lord to come to you in blessing or in cursing? And Ahaz's lack of faith brings it upon the people in cursing. Ahaz, instead of trusting the Lord, trusts in Assyria. We can read this in 2 Kings as well. And then Assyria abuses them. And it brings cursing on them, not just from the north with the Syro-Ephraimite coalition, but with Assyria itself. Yeah, Lord, did you have a question? Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. So that's the first Assyrian crisis there. Second Assyrian crisis is 701. And so what are we talking about here? Yeah, the Sennacherib invasion. Go to chapters 36 through 38. We'll just put our eyes on this for now. And you can find this almost word for word in three places. Isaiah 36 through 38, and then 2 Kings 18, and then 2 Chronicles 32. All give this account of the Sennacherib invasion. And so to understand Isaiah, you can look at these other places, but also this is a place in Isaiah that's historical narrative as opposed to sermons, speeches from Isaiah. Most of the time in prophetic books you have speeches, sermons from prophets. But sometimes the prophets give historical accounts. You see it in Jeremiah as well, but here, 36 through 38, you've got this long account of Sennacherib surrounding Jerusalem, and Hezekiah. What's he do when Jerusalem is surrounded? His city is surrounded by Sennacherib, the Assyrian army.
He cries out to the Lord.
Yeah, cries out to the Lord, and they go to bed. And then what happens when they wake up? What do they see?
The army's dead.
Yeah, the Assyrian army is dead there in the fields. So something's overtaken them there. So let's read this last bullet. Anna, is that big enough? I know that's small.
I can't see it from.
Okay, who can see that? Bill, can you read that for us?
Last bullet.
Last bullet.
The Assyrian king Sennacherib invades and devastates all of Judah and its towns. Only Jerusalem has not been taken.
Okay. Masiga or Jerome, could you read this one? The Sennacherib there?
Sennacherib surrounds Jerusalem.
Yeah. So he surrounds Jerusalem, and Jerome?
Ezekiel finally gets Isaiah's message of chapters 28 through 35. Looks to the Lord for protection.
Okay. So Isaiah has given in 28 through 35 message about this invasion and what the response should be. And so Hezekiah looks to the Lord for protection. Hezekiah wasn't always faithful, but he acts faithfully here. He gets crowned with the title of being a good king in the 2 Kings and in 2 Chronicles there. Okay, and lastly, Matthew.
I've reached that point, I think.
That's okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Looking around the city in the morning, Hezekiah sees that God has killed the Assyrian army surrounding the city during the night.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay. All right. So we'll talk a little bit more about this next week. But yeah, it's 36 through 38 are great chapters, very inspirational to look at. 36 and 37, and then we'll look at chapter 38 next week. But let's go ahead and pray.